you inside the auditorium, multiple victims.
The United States has a problem with gun violence.
We hold the victims in our hearts.
Perhaps we may never fully understand it.
A man with a semi-automatic weapon.
We talk about it after mass shootings, but it's much larger and more complicated than those debates allow.
That is not accurate.
Here's what you need to know about the state of gun violence in America. It's true that the U.S. sees many more mass shootings than these other developed countries. Between 2000 and 2014, there were 133 mass shootings in public populated places. That's excluding gang violence and terrorism. Of course, the U.S. is a much larger country, but if you adjust for population size, it still ranks higher. Of these countries, Finland is next, with just 2 shootings over 14 years, but a much, much smaller population. And this type of tragedy seems to be happening more often in the U.S. Each of these squares represents a public mass shooting with 4 or more fatalities. Before 2011, they happened 6 months apart on average. But since then, only 2 months go by between them.
I hope and pray that I don't have to come out again during my tenure as president to offer my condolences to families in these circumstances.
That was October 1st, 2015. And just about 2 months later,
Yesterday, a tragedy occurred in San Bernardino, and our first order of business is to send our thoughts and prayers to the families of those who've been killed.
public mass shootings get all the attention because they're often so indiscriminate. But the truth is, mass shootings are unlike most gun deaths in America. Here's how it breaks down. According to the most recent data, 92 people are killed with guns every day on average. About 30 of those are homicides, of which maybe 1.5 at most can be considered part of mass shootings. Most of those killed, 58 people a day, are suicides. The rest are accidental shootings, police actions, and undetermined incidents. Those suicides, they show up in international comparisons too. These are the 10 countries ranked highest on human development by the UN. The US has the highest suicide rate among them, and this darker bar shows how many of those are with guns. Some people think suicide isn't really relevant to the gun issue.
But to go and think that some type of gun control regulations that are being talked about are going to stop somebody from committing suicide when there's so many other ways for people to commit suicide.
But the methods that people use are important because suicide attempts often stem from temporary crises. The vast majority of people who survive suicide attempts don't end up dying from suicide, but guns make it nearly impossible to get that second chance. The victims of gun suicides are overwhelmingly men and mostly white. And the rate of gun suicides has been increasing in the US. At the same time, the rate of gun homicides has been decreasing, especially since the 90s when crime rates in general were higher. But if you compare the US to other developed countries, it doesn't look like good news. These are homicides adjusted for population size. The US would probably have a higher homicide rate even without guns, but you can see how gun violence pushes that rate far beyond the other countries here. The victims of these shootings, they're not the ones you often see on the national news. They're disproportionately young black men.
You guys can leave here and go on with your lives, but we gotta go home to empty rooms because our children's lives were taken away by people who should not have had guns anyway.
This chart doesn't reflect private sales, but it shows the number of background checks, which all federally licensed dealers have to run. It suggests that the demand for guns has been increasing steeply since Barack Obama took office. So we've looked at gun deaths and at gun ownership. This chart puts them together. It shows that among highly developed countries, the more guns in a country, the more gun deaths. You can see that countries like Switzerland, which have relatively more guns than a country like the Netherlands, also have a higher gun death rate. And here's the US. Likewise, US states with more guns have more gun homicides. There are outliers like Idaho, which has higher rates of gun ownership but low rates of gun murders. But overall, there's a correlation between gun ownership and homicide rates. And that relationship has held up in studies that control for things like poverty, unemployment, and crime. The correlation between gun ownership and gun deaths is even stronger for suicides. It makes sense. Depression with a gun is more dangerous than depression without one. Likewise, fights, domestic disputes, road rage, drunkenness, all much more dangerous with a gun than without. That said, you might need different policies to keep guns away from potential mass shooters than you would to keep them out of inner city gangs or out of the hands of someone who might hurt themselves. America doesn't have a gun problem. It has several of them.
Okay, what's your name?
My name is Rami.
How long have you been in the United States?
I've been here for 5 years and a half.
Do you ever have any experience with gun violence?
No, not really.
Okay. What do you think should be done to reduce the gun violence?
I think that there should be more strict rules about gun control, and there should be more background checks and much more regulations than just giving someone a gun just right away without going through procedures.
Okay. Oh, won't criminal kills with other guns if they don't have gun? Other weapons if they don't have guns?
So yes, of course they would, but the problem with the gun is that if there's a gun, if there's no gun, you can actually have your own space. Like when you're running away, no one can really get you if they had another type of weapon.
Great. So, yeah. So, what do you think is the most effective way to reduce mass shooting?
The best way to decrease the mass shooting is, of course, have more gun control in the United States.
Yeah. Okay. Were your